Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is the 1st of May and that means that it's wrap-up time again. I am really considering changing the way I do wrap-ups because I kind of hate filming monthly wrap-ups, and I think that I'm gonna get more in the style of like a bi-monthly or like once I've read 5 books, something like that. I would love your input on kind of the kinds of wrap-up videos that you prefer, because by the time I get to the end of the month, a lot of those books that I read at the very beginning of the month or that I finished right at the beginning of the month, I've really forgotten a lot of my feelings or thoughts on them, and I don't feel like I'm giving you guys as good of a picture of the books. And also, when we have months like this where I read 10 books, it means that these videos are really long. And I know some of you don't mind long videos, but I know other people don't want to sit down and watch a really long video. So I would love your input on what you think a better style would be for these. You can leave it in the comments. I may actually just pop a poll up here to get your kind of feedback that way. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the 10 books that I read in April. So right at the beginning of the month, I finished the graphic novel, the 2nd volume of Wires and Nerve by Marissa Meyer. This is a companion graphic novel duology to the Lunar Chronicles. This is really cute. It has really fun artwork in this like blue toned style, and I really enjoyed reading this. It was a nice dip back into the Lunar Chronicles, and I'm glad that I picked it up. If you're at all a fan of the Lunar Chronicles as a whole, then I think this companion duology in graphic novel format is a lot of fun, and you should definitely pick it up. And then around that same time, I actually finished, so I was reading the audiobook of this one, so Miss Burma. And I was vlogging at the time for a readathon, so I have some other thoughts about this that are in that sort of vlog. But basically, this was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and it was also on the National Book Award long list. Yes, there's a sticker right here. So I was really interested in it because I hadn't heard anything about it. Nobody was talking about it, yet it was on these 2 prize lists. And I have a friend, I mentioned this before, who lives in Burma or Myanmar, and so I've always been kind of interested in the culture and the history and everything, and I've read a couple of fiction books set there, and this is a work of fiction, obviously, and it is... So it's billed as being a novel, so it talks about how she, like the daughter who is Miss Burma, is the first Miss Burma, and the political kind of implications or whatever. But the majority of this book is just like all of these stories about the awful traumatic things that happened to her parents, mostly, well, I was gonna say mostly her mom, but really her dad goes through a lot of the really hardcore trauma, and her mom is just like this figure that just keeps soldiering on, and it just, I found this book exhausting, and I felt like it never really gave a good picture of Burma itself. So there's no getting around the fact that the history of Burma is incredibly violent. Even to this day, it's still, you know, there are a lot of violent things in their political system, and you know what's going on in their country and what has gone in their country over the years. And so that's something that, you know, obviously was going to be in here, but this is just something that like leaves you feeling exhausted because there is nothing to bring you out of that. So it's like you go from one horrible scene to the next, and you never feel any kind of emotional rest from that, but also it's just not very well written. Like, honestly, I feel like she should have just written a nonfiction book about her family's history instead of trying to fictionalize it, because it didn't work for me as a work of fiction. It really just was, like I said, exhausting. So So let's bring the mood back up again. This is Secret of Platform 13, which I heard about on the channel Jean's Bookish Thoughts. So she was talking about how if you like Harry Potter, you would like this, and how some of the inspiration for certain aspects of Harry Potter could have come from this. And because this was published before Harry Potter was published. And basically this is this adorable story about this secret island, and the prince from the secret island gets lost in the real world and he's stolen. And there's this door that only opens every 9 years. And so then it's like the whole story is this rescue mission with this unlikely cast of rescuers. And it's incredibly cute. It's so magical. It's not really anything like Harry Potter, but it does have that really magical, whimsical feel like Harry Potter. So that's why I think people who do like the Harry Potter series would really enjoy this as just sort of a little foray into a fun, whimsical, magical world again. And then I picked up A Paris Apartment by Michelle Gable. This is one of 2 of her books that I haven't read. This is actually, I think, her first book that she ever put out. And it was really, really popular when it first came out. I just, for some reason, never got around to it. I actually bought this book at one point, but I bought it and shipped it to my friend who is, she lived in France for a little while. She speaks French, so she eats up anything that's like French culture or, you know, stories set in France. So I knew she'd like it, but I never actually read it. Basically, this is a dual perspective story. It tells the story of a modern woman who is a furniture appraiser for Sotheby's auction house, and it tells the story of a woman in the Belle Epoque time period in France who is essentially like a prostitute, or like a really high-class prostitute. And the stories are bridged by the fact that the main character in the modern time is going to France to basically appraise all this furniture in the other woman's house that was in this apartment locked up for 40 years untouched. And that part, the apartment and the untouched furniture from the Belle Epoque era, actually comes from a true thing that happened in France. You can Google it. It's kind of incredible. And the painting, which is referenced in this book, which is a Giovanni Boldini, is stunning. It's so beautiful. And I loved the tie-in to something that really happened, and I think that this book came out shortly after that, and that was something that fed its popularity. I don't think this is her strongest book. I did spend most of the modern portions being like, can we get back to the historical portion? Because I felt like the woman in the modern time was just really, really insufferable. Her name was April, and it was like she was dealing with an infidelity situation in her marriage, but like the way that she was handling it was just like you wanted to strangle her. And I still never felt really great about her storyline. The whole time I was just like, this is super improbable and silly and frivolous. And I was surprised at how much of the novel was actually set in the modern perspective, because typically with these historical fiction novels, a great deal of it is set in the historical part of it. And I found the historical part of this super fascinating. And the woman, that was like, she was kind of an awful person at times, but at other times she was just so fascinating and interesting. So I wanted more of the historical and less of the modern. It was just okay. Like I said, not my favorite of her books, but if the premise strikes your fancy, I would definitely give it a read. And then I have been this year in quite a science fiction kick. I looked at my spreadsheet and was shocked at just how much of it was science fiction reading, because usually that is not the case. But for some reason, I've just been really drawn to science fiction books. And so I hadn't read one in a couple of reads, so I decided I wanted to pick up something science fiction. So I went and looked at all the different books I had on my TBR shelf, and I came up with this one, which is The Inverted World by Christopher Priest, and this is like a classic science fiction. I love the SF Masterworks editions. Thanks, Rachel, for Colonnati for bringing these into my life. but I actually discovered this book when looking at other sci-fi masterworks editions on Book Depository, and then I read the synopsis for this one and was really interested, because essentially what this book is about, it is about a city that is on a set of railway tracks that is perpetually moving. So it's moving through kind of a world that is very different from what they think that Earth and the world and everything should be like. So the whole premise is that they have to keep moving for some reason, and nobody really knows. There's a lot of secret kind of things, so that the general public in the city doesn't really know what's happening or why the city is the way it is. I'm not even sure if the general population knows that the city is moving. They just know they can't leave the city. Whereas there's like these guilds that go out and do different things to keep the city moving and to maintain the city. It was really fascinating. I really liked the main character. I was a little bewildered by what was like a prologue or something at the very beginning. I wasn't really sure what it had to do with the book because it didn't seem to fit, but it actually comes in much later to give you an understanding about it. Now, one thing I think probably they shouldn't have done, and this is probably from when the book was initially published, but it does say one of the trickiest and most astonishing twist endings in modern science fiction. I didn't find the twist ending all that surprising. Like, the stuff happening before the actual twist, I just kept being like, what is happening? Like, what is going on? This is so weird. And I think finding out why they need to keep the city moving, super, super interesting. The twist ending, that I can't say anything else to even, you know, talk about that. While interesting, not super surprising or like mind-blowing. I felt like the rest of it leading up to it was really mind-blowing, and then when you find out what's really happening, it's kind of like, oh, okay. But yeah, so interesting, this book. I would absolutely recommend it if you are into science fiction, and it's written in a really like approachable, readable way. I just sped through this, and I would recommend it. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars, mostly because it hyped up that twist and then it kind of let me down. But I think everything up to the twist is so interesting that I can forgive that. And then one of my favorite things lately, and by lately I mean like the last 2 years, have been the Hogarth Shakespeare edition retellings of Shakespeare plays. These are so fun, and what I do is I listen to the audiobook of the original play with like a full cast. It's a lot of fun. And then I pick up the audiobook of the retelling. So I did that this month with The Winter's Tale and Gap of Time. The Winter's Tale, I actually found this to be a really interesting story. I found like the main character you're supposed to find him despicable. He was pretty despicable, and some of the things he does and the way that like he just thinks that everything that he does is right, and even though all these people are telling him like, you're insane, like none of us believe you, your wife did nothing wrong, you're being crazy, he still, because he's the king, gets his way and, you know, does what he does, which makes you think of some politicians. So I felt like this was a little timely of a read, but the basic story of A Winter's Tale is that the king thinks that his wife has had an affair with his best friend or his brother. I'm not 100% sure if they're actually siblings or not. And so he sends her to prison, and she has a baby because she was like 9 months pregnant, and then he sends the baby off into the wilderness to die, and the baby gets picked up by like peasants who take care of her, and like the person who dropped her off in the woods left like a bunch of money, and so then they're rich, and somehow the brother or friend's son meets her then everything circles back around, essentially. But it's kind of a convoluted tale, but then it's Shakespeare, so... but I thought the tale and the kind of moral and everything was really interesting, so I liked this one. This is one of Shakespeare's plays that I've actually liked more than some of the others. When it came to A Gap in Time, or A Gap of Time, I don't know. I think I expected a little bit more of Jeanette Winterson. She did drop a lot of like Winter's Tale lines or like references, or they would actually be like, that's from the Winter's Tale, which I found that a little bit like, ugh, come on, we know it's a retelling, there's no need to like call attention to it. But I don't know, her version of the king was a complete and total just tyrant, awful human. Other words I want to say, but then I'll get demonetized. He was awful. He was straight up awful. And there were times listening to the audiobook that I was just like, ugh. Because I don't, while I do have kind of a sailor's mouth, I don't really like it when people use like really aggressive cussing in audiobooks for some reason. And there was a lot of that in this. So if that's something you don't like, beware. Maybe read it instead of listening to the audiobook. But essentially her take on this is, it's like this man who is like a business mogul. He's kind of like a Wall Street type person, but in London. And he's married to this singer, and he has this best friend that Twist, he was in love with and had a sexual relationship as like a young boy. And then now he thinks that this friend of his is having an affair with his wife, and that the baby is his, and so he sends the baby to America. Like, he's sending the baby to his friend. He runs his friend off, and he sends somebody to take the baby to him. The guy basically is carrying a bunch of money. Somebody finds out he's carrying a bunch of money and then end up killing the guy, which is sort of what happens in the play. And then this poor family picks up this baby and takes care of him, and it goes from there. So, you know, the basic premise is very similar, but the characters are a lot different, much more modernized. I actually liked this one more than some of the retellings, but it still wasn't my favorite. My favorite still goes to Hagseed. But I do think that this is one of the stronger pairings. So if you're into if you're into retellings of Shakespeare, check it out. If you're into Jeanette Winterson, check it out. I liked it. We're getting close to the end, I promise. I have 2 volumes of Lumberjanes that I read during Dewey's 24-hour readathon, volume 6 and volume 7, and essentially this just carries on the shenanigans that our Lumberjane friends get up to. This one is like maritime themed, and there's like selkies, and the bear woman comes back. This one has a lot of stuff about cats and is really, really cute. Has a really adorable twist at the end. And then my battery's blinking, so I'm gonna do this fast. The last one that I finished was Vaults of Walt, Volume 2. This is a bunch of stories about Walt Disney and the parks and the movies. And the last chapter in here is about Roy O. Disney, and it made me cry. And I do think that these are really good. I continue to pick them up anytime that I'm gonna go to Disney. So if you like them, I recommend Jim Korkis's work. And that is it. I am gonna let you guys go. Again, my battery's flashing. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know how you'd like to see wrap-ups in the future, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!